there's no parish that's not rich with potential. There's no parish that can impact not just the local community, but your city, your nation, because it's filled with ordinary people. That's all you need is ordinary people. See, God can do extraordinary things with ordinary people. We've seen it time and time and time again. In fact, God favors ordinary people. He likes to really work through vessels of clay so that people have no other conclusion but to see that such extraordinary treasure comes from God. And so it's the stuff that God likes to use, and our parishes are full of that human stuff, these amazing people and people who have yet to discover the richness that God has for them.
Welcome to the Huntley Leadership Podcast, helping leaders be a positive catalyst in the people they support, the organizations they serve, and the communities they live. This podcast will make you think, laugh, and grit your teeth with new determination to make your parish or business a place of transformation, passion, and purpose. If you're still breathing, you are powered for impact. Welcome back to the Huntley Leadership Podcast. I'm your host today, Ron Huntley. Welcome to the show. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, it's great to have you. It's so important that we dive into issues of leadership as it relates to the church if we're going to continue to make a difference and reach those who are far away. I'm really excited to be with my friend, Father James Mallon, today. We're going to talk about a topic that I think is very timely because as we're recording this, a lot of priests are receiving their next assignments. And Father James Mallon is the pastor and is no stranger to getting new assignments from time to time. So we're going to dive into that. Father, welcome to the show.
Ron, it's great to be here.
The whole idea of new assignments, I thought we'd talk about this through the lens of how many assignments have you had? I was going to say 4, but have you had more than that?
Well, assignments as pastor. So, when I was an associate pastor, I was at the cathedral. So right. My first, so I went from the cathedral, I was there for 3 years, and then I was given my first parish. I was there for 4 years, and then I went to my next parish. I was there for 7 years, and then from there to St. Benedict, I was there for 7 years, and then I took a stint with the diocese for 3 years, and then I'm back in the parish where I am now. So that would be, as pastor, this would be my 4th parish.
Fantastic. I remember your first one. I remember having dinner. We had a wonderful dinner there one time.
That's right. I remember that. I still have the photographs. That was actually, it's funny because the digital cameras were a brand new thing. And that was the year I got my first digital camera. So when I pull up my digital photo album, those are the first pictures.
That's funny. It was probably huge, probably the size of a brick back then too, wasn't it? Yeah, that's fun. Terrific. So let's talk a little bit about the assignment, and let's talk about this through the lens of, what was the assignment? Describe it to us. Yeah, let's start there. Describe the community or the parish to us, as you recall it.
It's funny you should ask this because I just found out at lunch today, just about an hour ago, that a dear lady who was very involved in the parish that I was close to actually passed away. She was 89 years of age. So her funeral's tomorrow, and so I'm going to run up later today for her wake. So it's interesting that you're asking me to go back to this parish. I was 30 years old, and I had been at the cathedral for 3 years, and I was chomping at the bit to get my own parish. Yeah. Show them how it's done. Let's do this the right way. I was my first 2 years at the cathedral, I was with a great guy. Irony of ironies, he was later made a bishop and became Archbishop of St. John's, and now he's living. His apartment is right above my office. I have a residence of retired priests, so he's now, I guess it's called revenge. He's actually living in the apartments for retired priests that is connected with my parish. So there you go. But I was with him. We had a wonderful 2 years together. He had vision. He probably wouldn't have used those words, but he wanted to make the cathedral like a parish. That's vision. And there was a sense that we were going in a direction, and we had there wasn't like a big detailed plan, but there was a bit of planning. Okay. And then he left in my final year. A new rector of the cathedral came in, and there was no plan. There was no vision. I remember waiting patiently for him to sit down. I mean, I was the associate, even for us to sit down one-on-one. No conversation, no meeting. We talked at lunch. But finally, I remember after about 3 weeks, I said to him, when are we going to sit down to talk? He said, talk about what? And I said, the plan. He said, plan? What plan? So literally what he said to me, what plan? And his plan was, the degree of planning was the weekday mass schedule or the mass schedule pinned on the bulletin board. And I had to, at the time, we had grown the Sunday night mass. There was like, we were getting 400 or 500 young people coming.
Yeah.
We started a Catholic young adult group that had about 80 members in it. We're breaking and small. So we had a whole bunch of stuff going. And I remember he moved me off the evening mass. And it was just, anyway. So I was desperate to get to my first parish. I just wanted to be somewhere where I could spread my wings and actually I didn't know what these words meant, vision, plan. I didn't really know, but I just knew that there was fire in my belly, and I needed to go there.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because again, there are so many, being an associate can be a wonderful opportunity to grow, but it can also be an incredible season of torture. And so depending on who you're working with, and so having that hunger in your belly to get your own parish is probably not uncommon, right? As somebody who's...
Yeah, and I had both. Like I was under the first 2 years, a great guy, fantastic guy who gave me a lot of latitude, gave me room to get wins and make mistakes, and was patient. And had himself had vision and passion. So, but I also got the taste of the other side of it, and it was... Yeah, I was ready to get out of there. So I was moved to a small parish, really, a small country parish on the outskirts of Halifax, actually in a small fishing village. Even the name, it was called Herring Cove. But it was about a 25-minute drive from the city. And I was to go there as half-time pastor because I was assigned as the vocation director for the diocese. Right. Yeah. Half-time. Yeah. So I would be in the parish Thursday was my day off at the time, so I'd be there Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then Tuesday and Wednesday I'd work at downtown, and then Thursday was my day off. So that was kind of like my basic cycle, and I had to start there hadn't been a vocation office in many, many years, so I was kind of starting everything up from scratch. So I was doing that, and then the bishop at the time had just said, well, just go there and do mass. It's a small country parish. There's not a lot happening there. But we changed that because it was fantastic. It was so exciting because, I got like, hey, I'm living in a house. I've never lived in a house before. Right. The house was a total dump, but anyway. It was full of mice. It was like, oh man, it was. The previous pastor was a wonderful holy man, like very, very holy guy.
Yes. Who
didn't take any salary because the parish wasn't bringing in enough money to pay his salaries. He was living off his pension. And so I arrived and I'm like, hey folks, I have student loans to pay and you need to pay me for this. So the collection has to triple because it was terrible, So that was right. I remember my first mass. It was a Saturday afternoon mass. I was the only person in church singing, and everyone was staring at me. Like at the opening procession, people were turning around and looking at me, and literally, I remember as excited as I was, my heart sank. It was so blooming depressing. It was like no one wanted to be there. Everyone looked miserable and bored. Now, were they all miserable and bored? I'm sure not all of them were.
Maybe they're just Catholic.
Yeah. But I remember at the time thinking, it was just like just such an incredible burden for how it's not supposed to be like this. How do we wake this up? And that's when shortly after that, I met with you. And I remember we were sitting on a bench somewhere, and you told me about Alpha.
Yeah.
And that was when I first took a look at Alpha, although I was very biased at the beginning. These English accents, I'm from Scotland. And it was Anglican, that was the other thing.
Yeah. It was interesting because I remember asking you that day in frustration, like as we were going for a walk down Spring Garden Road, and I was just trying to wrap my head around the whole idea of evangelization. I didn't quite understand it. I felt that, like, of course, later on, years later, you do APES and you have a language for this stuff. I didn't have a language for any of these things. I just had this stirring within me, and I was so fatigued with my lack of fruitfulness in bringing anybody to faith. Like, I'm just bad at it, and I cared that I was bad at it, that's where the pain is, right? If you don't care, then what difference does it make? But if you do care, it actually hurts. And that's when, and I'd been involved in Alpha just at somebody's house. They were not Catholic, and I was enjoying the process, but I didn't see what it had to do with the Catholic Church. And what you said to me that day, it really changed my paradigm, because I remember saying, like, James, like, how am I supposed to evangelize? Like, I'm really struggling with it. I probably didn't even use that word. I'd probably just said, how do I bring anybody to faith? I don't know how to bring anybody to faith. I'm trying, and I'm terrible. And what am I supposed to do? Bring people to the Mass, because most Masses in our city at the time were just like yours when you talked about going that first day. And it's like, you can't bring somebody to that and expect them to meet Christ. And you said to me, that's what's supposed to happen the rest of the week, is this all the work of the church and bringing people to faith and discipling people and evangelizing. That's done all the week. And then on Sunday, that's supposed to be a place for the fully committed, the fully convicted. And I got so excited about that image of what church could be if everybody was all in. But then I realized, well, wait a minute, I've never even seen a church that even thinks like that or has even tried to do anything about that. And that's when the whole idea of Alpha came up, because it helped to begin to put what you were saying in. It seemed like Alpha could be a tool for what you were talking about. Again, I was just back then just putting the pieces together.
Yeah, because for me, I always had this, I grew up going to church all the time, but my conversion happened on effectively what was a Crucial weekend. And it was an incredible experience, and afterwards they used to, this community would gather one night a month on, I think it was Tuesday nights or something. And I remember going to those gatherings, people would give talks, share their testimonies. There was celebration of the Mass, which was like nothing like in any parish, because everyone wanted to be there. Everyone was into it. Everyone was singing and praying, and everyone knew each other, and there were small group exercises. So there was like community worship, evangelization, discipleship, ministry. And I'd experience that. Then I'd look at the parish, which was like a culture, what I'd now call a culture of minimalism, culture of mediocrity. And I'd say, what gives? Because if we could bottle this and transfer it into a parish, we change the world. And so that was when I was 17 years old. I thought that, and even when I had my first assignment, that was the driving vision still in me, but I didn't have the tools. I didn't have a tool to do it, and that's what I discovered through Alpha seemed to be the thing. It seemed that it could be possible, and was willing to give it a try, and it made a huge difference. In my first book, people often who have at least read the first page. Some people read the first page, forget it. But the first page opens. The book opens with a story of this lady saying to me,
"Oh yes,
we don't need to know more about Jesus. What we need is cards." And this lady, she was furious with me. That was that parish, because we had the only night, because of my work with vocations, the only night of the week. We weren't going to run Alpha on a Friday night. The only night of the week we could do it was on a Monday night. And there had been a card social in the hall going on for about 700 years at that point, with some of the original members still involved. and we had to move it. We asked them to move to it.
Yeah,
We
you
asked
didn't
them to
cancel
move
it.
to another night. Well, I didn't say cancel. He said just move to another night. Later, about a couple of years later, found out the reason why they couldn't move it to another night is because they played cards every night. Every night of the week, they played cards in
Just in a
different
different-
church halls all over town. So, so I was persona non grata. They were like, she gave me a dressing down, and everyone approved. It was like, when they laid the cloaks at the feet of a young man named Saul, and he approved of the killing.
Right. They were all
So-
given to him.
So we ran Alpha, and amazing things started happening. We saw people encountered the Lord in a life-changing way. We saw people experiencing the Holy Spirit, experiencing community, taking ownership of the mission, and that church began to wake up.
Can you
And-
remember one of the people that you saw come to faith? Like, what? Can you remember the first person you saw come to faith in a profound way, or at that parish when you were using it as a tool?
I'm trying to think. That was 22 years ago. It's a long time. There was. I mean, a lot of it was people who had been lifelong Catholics, even church-going Catholics,
Yeah.
waking up and coming to life. There was quite a number of people like that, and then eventually I was only there for 4 years, but by the second, third year, we started people began to invite people to church. It began to grow.
Really?
And then the second year, they gave me a second little church. So I had actually two churches, but at halftime with the vocation work as well. So, but we saw incredible. It was, the thing that struck me was what can happen when you mobilize a community.
Right.
I remember, I think it was around the third year. At the time, that year, the Archdiocese used to do an annual youth weekend, like a retreat.
Yeah.
A youth conference, and that particular year, the youth minister for the diocese had resigned and hadn't been replaced. So the diocese announced they were not going to do a youth conference. So we said, well, why don't we do a youth conference? This is
little
little
church.
country parish. We actually pulled it off. We did it independently. When the diocese found out, they kind of jumped on board with it. But we actually rented out a university. We got speakers. Parishioners pulled together their air miles. We flew in a Catholic rock band from Texas. We advertised all over the province. We ended up something like between 200 to 300 teenagers came from all over the place, and we put on this conference.
That's
By
amazing.
mobilizing parishioners from one tiny parish. And I'll never forget that, because it taught me that we're barely scratching the surface of kingdom impact, mission impact of even small parishes. When people tell me, oh, we've only got a small rural parish, so you can impact your small rural reality and impact even beyond that. So that was eye-opening when people get inspired and they catch a vision. Again, I didn't know what these words meant at the time, but I knew I had a conviction that, number one, things could be better than what they are right now, and that but the starting point was to awaken people. Right. And when you release people in their gifts, it's incredible.
Right. That's so cool. And so I just want to summarize a couple of things in my head. There's so many cool things that come out of what you've just shared. But I guess going into that parish in the beginning, it's like you're really excited. So the opportunity is, hey, I finally get to do this the right way, which is a lot of young priests feel that way when they get their first assignment. And then you get there and you're like, oh my gosh, like it's like nobody's, look, they're not excited, they're not singing, it's just very low levels of engagement and participation. And so there lies the challenge, right? So the opportunities, I get to do this, and isn't this going to be wonderful? And then you're faced with your current reality, which is, oh no, this is not a good starting point. And I don't think you're alone when people go to a new assignment, that people can feel that way. And so, but then what did you do? You knew you had to awaken people. And then just so happened God gave you that tool, really, like that was a gift from God for you, probably in your priesthood at that time. And it was the very thing that brought people into a relationship with Jesus. And then the vision that you had, that there could be so much more. It sounds like people were far more interested and awakened to receive that vision and to be a part of it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Is that a fair assessment? That's so cool. All right. So then and again, I just want to tie that back to one more thing. The work that you and the priest were doing in your first assignment at the cathedral with vision, without the words vision, but had the hope for young people and young adults, and all this activity blossoming out of this passion for what church could be. To what do you mean? What talk like the schedule's on the door? Like, one is going to kill the church, and one has the capacity for unbelievable kingdom impact. Like that one example, that really is what plagues the church in many ways. Are you a staple the schedule to the door person, or are you a believe that there's more person? Boy, it matters.
The interesting thing, I remember back to those, when I was at the cathedral with that Catholic young adult group that we started. So many of the principles that have shaped and impacted my life as a pastor were kind of formed there, because we had a vision. Again, I wouldn't have known what vision was, but we had a vision of equipping and empowering young Catholics. We saw the huge potential there, and what we did is we started with monthly large group gatherings, and we got 30 people, then 40, 50, 60. At one point we were up to 80 people, and so they were monthly gatherings, and then we eventually, it was kind of like a smorgasbord of small group experiences, from community to prayer groups to groups that went out on the streets to serve the poor. It was kind of like, what's your area of interest? Get together with people and do it. And I was kind of like, leading it, but it was very much about empowering people to lead their particular ministries. And again, I didn't know anything about leadership or anything like that, but it was kind of all doing it by instinct and a conviction that a parish should be, not could be, but should be, a community of communities.
Beautiful. Well, and I remember in the diocese at that time, I was very aware of the impact you were having. Like everybody was. Like it's like you go to the cathedral now, I don't think there's a whole heck of a lot happening. And so there wasn't then either. And then you came along, and all of a sudden it was the chatter of the diocese. Like, what is going on? Like everybody was really tuned in and dialed into it. Let me ask you something. As you departed from your first assignment, not at the cathedral, but as a pastor in Heron Cove, what were your learnings? And so we talked about the opportunity, we talked about the challenge. What were your learnings as a priest leader as you came away from that season of your life? What would you say you learned the most?
I learned that I was kind of like by myself, not going to be very successful or very healthy. Because I had, I think at one point, like my tendency was to do more and more, and to do it faster and faster and more intensely. And like I was a total burnout machine. I was a champion burnout guy, and I was a prime candidate for it. Right. And it was, I always knew I was a bit like that, but having the parish, seeing these incredible things happen, and also doing the other work, and that I knew I was good at getting things going, but the downside of that is once they were going, it would just get overwhelmed because there'd be so many things going, and I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't really, again, the whole idea of leadership and what that means, I was clueless to it. I had really no idea. So that was that's what I left with, and there was some pain points for sure around that dynamic. But the best I knew at the time was, well, we've got to make sure that doesn't happen again. I don't burn myself out again. I had no strategy for it. It was it was a mild hope. that it wouldn't
Right.
happen. But no,
Didn't have a lot of confidence in myself not to do it, but I knew I shouldn't do it. Yeah.
but I knew I was going to this new parish. At least I had some staff,
Yeah.
which
And a
would be a
fresh
bit
start.
different.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Let's move into St. Thomas Aquinas. So when you went there, what was the opportunity? And then what was the challenge as you came to that new community?
The opportunity was that it was downtown. It was in a historically, one of the well-off areas of town, with a respectable area of town. So I'd gone from the fishing village to the parish that was, in the 50s and the 60s was the crown jewel. It was where the vicar general was pastor, when he'd have like 6 curates and would sit up in his room counting the collection. It was that kind of model of church, and a lot of the more senior parishioners still lived off of that kind of sense of entitlement of their parish, but there was nothing there. There had been no development of leaders, no evangelization, no discipleship, no real, a few basic ministries. The buildings were all falling apart. It was quite depressing, actually. And it was a similar thing. So instead of card socials in the hall, we had scouts, cubs. Like the hall was used 5 nights a week by non-parish community groups, because there was nothing else going on. But one of the challenges, opportunity and challenge, and this again was a real learning principle, coming in there and having a vision of what could be. I looked around and said, okay, who are the people here who get it? Who are the people here who love the Lord, who have a personal faith and a desire to share that? And I was able to identify about 24 different people who had leadership potential and all of these things. Again, I didn't know I wouldn't have called it that, because I didn't know what that was. But and I remember going and having coffee with them, meeting them, and sharing what was in my heart about how parishes need to become authentic communities. And I can't do this by myself. And I've got this thing called Alpha that I've experienced is amazing. And I'm asking you to come and help me do it so we can begin to transform this parish. And here was the thing. All of these people I would call missionary disciples, they were all committed to they were all members of movements. Couples for Christ, Regnum Christi, Curcio. They all had commitments. They all had like their weeknight where they spent with their small group community. So they were in small groups. They were in all of these things, but it was in a movement outside of the parish. And my invitation to them simply was actually, it was a big ask. It was for them to step away from their involvements in what gave them life, and to come on a journey with me to try to create that kind of life within the parish. That's the way I pitched it. And I knew that if they didn't do that, then guess what? They would continue to be fed and nourished and nurtured and discipled and grow and find community, not in the parish. They just come to the parish to get communion, and hopefully maybe a good homily. But other than that, everything else that ought to be the life of a parish was lived outside. And almost every single one of them said, yes, we'll give this a go. And we launched Alpha. And again, similar thing. We started seeing people having conversions and transformed lives. Same thing. People started coming alive. We did follow-up discipleship programs. The first time I ever saw what we called pastorates back then, which were home groups of 30 people meeting in homes. We actually initially tried to launch 2 of those groups in that parish, but we saw the church begin to be transformed. Similar thing to my last parish. At the beginning of the second year, they gave me the neighboring parish. So everywhere I've gone, it's been like that. So I got a second parish, this one, which had been run by the Jesuits for like 40, 50 years, and was a mile down the road. Both of these parishes were very close to a university. So there were lots of challenges, again, around questions of amalgamation and buildings and parish renewal. And when they gave me the second parish, the mandate from the bishop was to merge these 2 parishes together legally and canonically, and spiritually, of course. And I was there for 7 years, and we saw, again, incredible things happen.
What was it like for you? You mentioned when you came to that church, you had staff. What was that like for you? Because that's a new learning thing for many priests. If they, in a small church that doesn't have any, and then go to one that does, that's a whole new thing, right?
Yeah, when I first got there, I had, again, the staff was, it was a housekeeper and a janitor and a religious ed person and a secretary. Those were the staff. I had to let the janitor go. He was like, oh my goodness. He wasn't exactly working a full-time job, even though he was getting a full-time pay, if you get my drift. So
Gotcha.
That was a change we had to make. I didn't need a housekeeper. No, I did. We had a housekeeper because, again, I had a number of priests living in the house. Some of them retired. And so, again, pastoral staff, minimal. A secretary and a religious ed person. But the following year, when they joined the other parish, all of a sudden I had another 3 staff. So all of a sudden I found myself, now I have like 5 staff. And I don't know anything. I don't know how do I lead. And that's when I first went looking, and I couldn't find anything in the Catholic context to help me. And that's when I first found the Willow Creek resources,
Right.
and the Global Leadership Summit. And I remember getting connected with some of those talks that had been given.
Yes.
And watching them, and my mind was blown. It was like, I didn't know this was a thing. I didn't know you could think like this, or I didn't know you were allowed to talk this way, or even like he's putting words to what's been in my heart.
Yes.
The fact that I seem to have a capacity to see what could be, and a conviction that it really ought to be that way. And I had an ability to mobilize people towards that vision, and he's putting words to it, and almost like saying that it's something you should actually be intentional about doing. And so that was a big thing. That was when I remember reading my first book on leadership, and that was head knowledge. And as the years went on, and as we continued to grow, and things became more complex, and we achieved a lot of things, then there was the beginning of a whole new chapter in my life, which was quite painful, of learning about my own, actually how poor of a leader I actually was. I should say imbalanced a leader. I had high skills in some areas, and in other areas I was an absolute disaster. So that was difficult because I didn't know it. I didn't see it at the time.
Yeah, I know that you're apostolic, like if in the language of APEST, you're apostolic evangelist, and apostles can get really excited about what's next, a growth opportunity, and it's really exciting, and that can feed an incredible work ethic and hunger and desire for change, and that can be hard sometimes. You've mentioned that previously. That can be hard on some people sometimes. Who don't have the same amount of energy, but yet it's the very thing that mobilizes them to do things that they've never done before. And so it's a powerful charism, isn't it? But I think they all are, and all of them have a balcony in the basement, that a sweet spot maybe that we can work from. And
and I think for me it was realizing that I had a capacity to achieve and get things done and accomplish. But then I began to realize they'd often be like bodies lying on the ground. Like my leadership came with a cost, that I could hurt people without meaning to. Well, here's the thing. It's not only that I didn't mean to hurt people, I didn't even know I did it. It's like, like someone driving a car carelessly and hitting people and running over them, and you don't even know you've hit someone. Right. That's kind of like what I was like as a leader, and it was quite horrifying actually when I saw some of the impact that I had never intended to have, and how it impacted some people. And I remember really being forced to really ask myself, what does it matter if you accomplish X, Y, and Z if in the process you hurt people? And what am I going to do? Because it's like I'm driving my car and I've got no side mirrors and no rear view mirror. It's like, I need to get myself some side mirrors, like I need to improve my line of sight, because I'm not seeing this. Like, this is, the whole thing of a blind spot. A blind spot is only truly a blind spot if you don't even know you've got it.
So true. So true.
So that was difficult.
And so what a beautiful learning, painful learning. And some of the most significant learnings that we have in our lives usually come at a cost. And so thank you for sharing that. So then you get your next assignment at St. Benedict Parish.
Yes.
What was the opportunity? What was the challenge?
Well, the first challenge at St. Benedict was leaving the parish where I was, because by the time I was at the 7th year, we had 2 locations. And we had about 1,000 people going on a weekend, and things were moving. They had reached what I would call the end of phase 1 of renewal, but we'd hit a glass ceiling, because I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't know how to get it beyond that. But the pot was boiling over, and there was a lot of enthusiasm. The potential of those places was absolutely enormous. So when I was first approached to become pastor of this new parish, St. Benedict, that they were building, my first answer was no. I said no, and there was that did not make certain people happy, and they really challenged me, like, why are you saying no? And my answer was, because my work here is not finished, and this wise person said, well, James, your work is in any particular place is never going to be finished. And of course, then you get that unfair advantage, that like really terrible thing you say to people, well, will you at least pray about it? Come on. What a cheap shot, right?
Don't make me pray. This isn't
Don't make me pray.
It's not the time to consult God. I'm in charge here.
Leave God out of this. Of course, so the rest is history, as they say. So there was a sadness in leaving, but bringing with me a huge amount of learning along the way, because I had been blessed to begin to really learn about leadership, for a lot of it from encountering my own limitations and brokenness. And I had become really involved with Alpha on a global level, on an international level, going to conferences, just drinking the stuff in. Also kind of reflecting more and more on what I had experienced thus far in the priesthood, and in all of my attempts to try and awaken parishes. And I think I've always had the ability to think theologically. I've always enjoyed theology. And I always had a belief that the reason we do most of the things we do as Catholics is because we believe we're supposed to do those things. Like, we're a fairly obedient crowd, Yeah. We do what we do because we believe we're supposed to do that. And the question is, well, why do we believe we're supposed to do that? Because if you actually look at what we're doing, not only is it not working, a lot of the times it's actually against what we profess in our documents.
Amen.
And my conviction was there's kind of like an underlying invisible theology, there's a theological framework, like a kind of theological firmware, if you like, that kind of runs the hardware, that runs the operating system. And I was always kind of very curious about identifying what that was, and thinking through these things, and really looking at, say, the Great Commission, and saying, what does that actually mean in this new age? What does it actually mean for us?
Right.
So all of this stuff was coming together at the same time. They asked me to go into this parish, which seemed to be an incredible opportunity, but it also seemed to me that, you're just putting lipstick on a pig. It's like, if you're just changing the furniture and the address, yeah, that's exciting for a little while, but the underlying reality is going to be the same. So I said to the bishop, I'll go, but I'm going to ask your permission for this parish to be a pastoral laboratory. And I shared with him some of the ideas, and he asked me to put it in writing, which I did the following year, and that actually became kind of the foundation of Divine Renovation, that my first book. So that's when I went there, and a couple of months before I went there, I was at an Alpha conference, USA Alpha USA conference, and I was in the front row. I remember in this big auditorium because I was doing some training to be a speaker at conferences, and in the middle of that talk, Nicky Gumbel was on stage giving a talk, and I just felt this really commanding kind of that I had to get up and call my friend Ron Huntley and invite him to come and be a part of this. And you remember that story. You almost went off the road, I think, when I asked you.
Definitely pulled over and stopped driving.
So it was incredible. Yeah. And you were a part of what happened in the next number of years there. So that was a game changer. And I think the most significant thing was that we were. It was no longer I. It was my language changed from I to we, and it pretty much is still we. We were able to build an incredible team of people, and that God used to do incredible things. And we had breakthroughs that I only dreamed would be possible. Like it's like it was there were some very painful years, very difficult years, but by the fourth or fifth year, it was incredible. It was an incredible journey, and to see incredible fruit, and once again, to see what can happen when a parish awakens. Here's the thing at St. Benedict, I realized that every parish I've been in, I got it going, but we always hit a glass ceiling. Mm-hmm. What I would call phase one. We never got out of phase one because I didn't have the gifts. I couldn't do it. And at St. Benedict, we got out of phase one. It was the point where we brought in that radical restructuring, and we formed a new model of leadership, and we moved from programs to process. We developed the game plan, and it broke us out. And the next 4 years, as we put all our major systems in place, and before I handed off leadership to Simon, it was incredible to see what can actually happen in a parish. It was wonderful. And of course, we had the Divine Renovation Conference in 2016 and all of that. So it was great.
That was so fun. One of the challenges that I saw and experienced firsthand when we went there together, you invited me to come, and we said yes. And we was just felt it was a call from God, really, unmistakably, really. But the division, because that was an amalgamation of 3 churches come together in one new building, and make no mistake about it, there was tension galore. Like, it was nasty. And I remember being in certain meetings sometimes that they did not trust each other. They didn't like each other. They didn't want to like each other. Like, it was intense, just in terms of a challenge. And I remember one lady getting up, God rest her soul, Anne, who's passed away since, but she was one of probably been around the previous church forever, and she was petrified because all the churches were dying and nobody wanted to go to church. Attendance at churches in our province was tanking, and they had a huge mortgage they were taking out, building a building that nobody would come to. And she was on the committee, and she actually felt guilty for saying yes to Father Bernie on so many things with the other people that were in this discernment process, because she just felt like she was a part of a group of people that were anchoring the next generation with something they didn't ask for and wouldn't be able to maintain. And I remember the pain of her reality. But then, as to your point, as things transformed and people came together, the joy she had, because it exceeded her wildest imagination. Father Bernie's vision for what could be, he was a little bit like Moses. He didn't get people to the promised land, but he certainly got them away from Egypt. And you came in as the next leader and really were able to take them.
The selection of the name St. Benedict, so they formed St. Benedict Parish a couple of years before the building was built. So they had one canonical legal parish in 3 buildings. And so for the person who would just be the Sunday mass goer, not really involved, they wouldn't have noticed any real change until one by one they sold the different churches. And when they sold the final church, basically they moved the following weekend into the new building.
Yeah.
And that was towards the end of May. And at the beginning of August, I came in as pastor. So, of course, the end of May around here in churches, a lot of people travel the summer. So
Yeah.
a lot of people don't land back on the ground until the following September. So I was by then pastor, and you've got people kind of coming in and experiencing each other really for the first time. There was a lot of different dynamics there, that were happening, because one of the again, something else we generally tend to be clueless about is the reality of size dynamics. So basically, we took one, medium, from a Catholic perspective, one medium-sized church and two small churches, and squished them together and made one large church. And it was so disorienting for people, because all of a sudden, instead of 40 people at Saturday afternoon mass, you have 400 people. And most of these people, you have no idea who they are. You don't recognize them. You don't know them. Instead of having immediate access to the priest, you're caught in a crowd. It was traumatizing to people. So they clung to their previous sense of identities, which was, and it became very, there was a lot of tension, because one of the locations was the larger parish, and it was a more well-off parish. There was some resentment around it. So all of that happened, but yet in the end it was worth the risk, because it brought about new life. And I remember hearing that they chose the name Saint Benedict very, very intentionally, because Saint Benedict is known as the father of Europe, the patron saint of Europe, because in I believe it was the 6th century, maybe I have to check my dates, but late 5th century or early 6th century, when Saint Benedict in Mount Subiaco, when he formed the first monasteries, and these monasteries, these schools of Christian life, as he called them, they began to spread all over Europe. He basically brought a new way of being Christian, a new expression of Christian life, and in that way is called the patron, or the father of Europe. So at this time, the previous pastor had this vision, and that the church would have to exist in a new way. And the first step of that was surrendering or submitting infrastructure to mission. Even though people got upset, people didn't like it, this was done because we can't cling to this outdated infrastructure. We've got to submit it for the sake of something far greater. And so that parish did birth something far greater than just a new building.
It sure did. Well, even as we're recording this, you're probably getting ready to head over to Europe soon for a big conference over there that Divine Renovation is putting on. And it's so true. It really had, his vision came true in ways that I'm sure he didn't dream possible. It's just so beautiful to see. So as you left there, what was your big learning?
I think those underlying questions or passions that I had when I was a young priest, about why can't this be bottled and we can have it over here? It was like, yeah, that is exactly what I thought. I knew this could happen. It was like that. It was like, I saw it, I tasted it, I saw it.
Yeah.
And now there's no going back. You can't unsee, you can't untaste it,
Yeah.
And I now know what's possible in a parish. And we learned a few things as well around, how to actually maybe not make so many mistakes, and we came out thinking that there's some transferable universal principles that can be applied to help other churches. A conviction that if it can be done here, it can be done again somewhere else. And again, much thorough self-awareness, I think, than I had previously. My whole model of priesthood had been turned upside down by Saint Benedict. Had been challenged to reframe how I led, the shape of my ministry. With every major turn in the road, I had to rethink it and reframe it. I think there's so many things that we've learned, but how fluid you have to be in parish leadership if your parish is moving and growing,
right? Or
if it's not moving and growing, you have to be fluid as well. That's if you're aware. You can just do nothing if you want, but if you're trying to actually get things going, there's no job description that's going to last longer than 6 months. There's no job
Right.
title, everything. You might as well call everything an experiment, because it is. That's
That's a
that's the
good
new
point.
reality. So
That's a
there was there
good
was there
point.
was so much. I mean, so many things I learned there.
One of the things that for me that I found so beautiful, it was the first time, like I'd run Alpha in two other parishes. First time I ran it, it was a passive approval. It's like, yeah, sure, I guess it wouldn't hurt to have one more program. And that blew up. It was like we had loads of more people than anybody ever thought. The impact it had was so amazing, but then didn't work out so well with that pastor. God bless him. He ended up leaving the priesthood and becoming an Anglican priest, a United Minister priest. And so it was just this fallout, and that was hurtful. It was hard for me. Next time I was asked to do Alpha in this parish, and that went really well until the pastor changed and the new pastor came in and shut it all down, and that was painful. And then you and I locked horns and went to work together, and it was the first time in my life as a layperson that I've ever been given the space and the confidence to and share a vision for more. And it was so life-giving. Like, it was the most fun you could possibly have on this side of heaven, constantly learning and growing. And it was so fun. Not to your point, not that there weren't things that were difficult, but it was worth it. It was so fun. And, I think to myself, if a fella is able to find a pastor once in his lifetime that you get to enjoy a season of actually using your gifts to glorify God, then consider yourself blessed, because it's not easy for lay people to find a priest that isn't just stapling the schedule of the masses to the door, who they're often very nice people, but they don't hunger for more. Like, that hunger for more is a rare quality in a priest, a pastor, in my experience. And that's the lament that I often experience when I speak and travel. And some people really have it as well, but they can't unleash it unless they're yoked with somebody else who believes it. And so that was for me, that was just unbelievably fun, and clearly changed the trajectory of my life in so many ways. So thank you for that season. It was a ball. And so now you're in a new place. And so we're going to pass over the diocesan thing, but that was really exciting. Maybe we should talk about that again another time, because you wrote another book called Beyond the Parish, and that might be a good segue to have that conversation, because it's definitely worth having. But then to go into to another parish, that's very different again. So describe that, and what was the opportunity and what was the challenge?
Well, huge challenges. I think for me, I had been working 50% of my time with the diocese, working on leadership support and the restructuring and everything, and kind of reframing the helping priests lead in a new way, and so I was doing that. I was working with the bishop 50% of the time. 50% of the time I was working with Divine Renovation, so I was doing a lot of traveling. And then COVID hit, and I remember when I was traveling, there was a point, I think I was in Malaysia or something. No, I can't remember where I was. But anyway, I just all of a sudden thought, I had a strong sense, I don't want to do this anymore. I feel like a hypocrite. I feel like I don't know what I'm talking about anymore, because the stories that I'm using are old stories. There was this itch to get that somehow I've been away too long. I need to get back in. And that only intensified with COVID, because here I was, coaching priests, and I realized this is a game changer. Like, this is true destructive change, and I'm coming at this like a theoretician. I've got no hands-on experience of this, and so again, there were a number of things that came together that made me put my name in to go back into parish ministry. We had a new bishop coming on board at that time as well, and so there were a few possibilities. One was a rural experience, where I actually offered to go out to a rural area of our diocese and be pastor of like 7 churches in an entire county. I thought, well, maybe God would call me to try and find a model for rural parishes. Wouldn't that be cool? Mm-hmm. bishop said to me, "You're not going out there." So they sent me over to the central parish in the town across. There's Halifax, there's a harbour, and the other side is Dartmouth. Oh, I grew up in Dartmouth. I did my high school years here, and I came into a very challenging situation of an amalgamation of five communities. So there was 4 parishes and a Polish mission that didn't consider themselves to be part of the parish, but nevertheless, canonically, they were all rolled into one. And we had 4 locations and a total of 14 buildings. And there was no history of evangelization or discipleship at all. And mostly seniors, like a very old parish. And of course, it was during COVID, during the lockdown. It was like the infrastructure, the buildings are falling apart. I remember my first week here, it was like there was the office had that musty smell. We had like shag carpets, and the computers did dial up. Like it was like, I'm not kidding you. My first day, I thought, what have I done? Like, what have I done? Because I used to have nightmares about leaving St. Benedict. Like, honestly, I would actually wake up in a cold sweat, and I came out of a dream. My nightmare was I was leaving St. Benedict to go somewhere else. And I'd wake up and say, "Oh, thank you, Lord. It was just a dream. It was a bad dream." Well, it's like, no, I'm living the bad dream. It's like, I wanted to get my car and go for a very long drive. Because it was like, I mean, and the other challenge for me was, by the time I stepped aside to St. Benedict, we had between full-time and part-time staff, we had about 21, 22 staff. And I had developed, we had a leadership team that was mid-level staff. So I had basically a situation where I supported 3-4 people, and they supported 3-4 people each in staff. And then we had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people serving in ministry. And we had developed this style of leadership where I was basically, in this team environment, supporting a few people, and there was co-responsibility and leadership culture, and I had to be careful what I'd say out loud, because someone would go form a team and go do it. It was that kind of place. And all of a sudden I'm in a place that's basically got no staff, and I'm answering the doors and taking out the garbage, literally. And it's like, oh my goodness, it's like if you're driving a 6-speed, you're used to being in 6th gear, and you say, well, I better gear down, and you gear down to 5th. Yep, I'm probably going I'll go to 4 and see what it's like. And it's like, oh no, I better go down to the 3rd. Oh, that's not working either. I better go to 2nd. And then you're in 2nd, you're thinking, crap, I gotta go to 1st. Like, I'm back in 1st gear. So that was like, okay, how do I navigate this change? Like I have to change my whole leadership style. And then there was also the whole ego thing and pride. And I struggled with that a little bit too, because it was like, people were watching, oh, Father James is going back in, let's see what happens, and feeling pressure to somehow get results. And it was not healthy at all. And so it was a very interesting journey. It's been an interesting journey. It's been almost 4 years. But I've been trying this divine renovation thing. You might have heard of it. It's actually not bad. It's not bad. I've been following this workbook, divine renovation workbook. And so, formed a leadership team and started doing alpha, and it's the same stuff. It's like, the parish is starting to wake up, like on weekends, hymns, homilies, hospitality, and starting doing leadership summits. And anyway, it's, once again, it's the same basic recipe that makes the difference. Different circumstances, a whole bunch of learning about real estate and buildings and maintenance and development. And so, there was a lot. There's been a lot of things, in doing all that in the middle of a pandemic as well. It was a challenge.
I want to share a story with you. I was talking with one of your parishioners one day, Corinne Dixon, and she was at Mass, and I think whatever the homily was about healing, and so it really touched her heart, and so she got a little weepy at one point. went up and received communion and came back. And before communion, though, when we did Peace of Christ, there was a new lady that was at your church. And so Corinne introduced herself and vice versa. And then after it was all over, the Mass was all over, she turned around to Corinne like she had like she'd seen a ghost or something. And she said, "What is going on here? Like, what is going on here? I've never experienced anything like this before. I have to come back. What's going on?" Like this, she could just feel the Spirit. She could feel the hope. She could feel the joy. And I'm sure if you're looking at your parish, you're seeing all the things that aren't done yet, or all the gaps in terms of getting to a place where you know, be completely content. And yet for this lady, she'd never experienced anything like it. And so I just want to share that as a word of encouragement to you, because it's hard work being a pastor, and I appreciate what you're doing and what you continue to do as you evolve as a pastor. And because, you know, it's an important work, and you're an important work. And I would say the same to all the pastors who are listening, is God's doing a work in you. And don't staple the Mass schedule to the door. Like, dream for more, eh? What's your encouragement as we wind up to all the people that might have gotten a new assignment or first time assignment? What do you want to say to them?
One of the first couple of weeks, I walked the streets of my parish, not all the streets, but I did prayer walks. I got my rosary out, and it led me to write a series of meditations for the Mysteries of the Rosary on the theme of parish renewal. And
beautiful.
I walked it, and I said, "Lord, help me to see what you want me to see." You know, like every parish. There's no parish that's not rich with potential. There's no parish that can't impact not just the local community, but your city, your nation, because it's filled with ordinary people. That's all you need is ordinary people. See, God can do extraordinary things with ordinary people. We've seen it time and time and time again. Yeah. In fact, God favors ordinary people. He likes to really work through vessels of clay so that people have no other conclusion but to see that such extraordinary treasure comes from God. And so it's the stuff that God likes to use, and our parishes are full of that human stuff, these amazing people, and people who have yet to discover the richness that God has for them. And so there's no parish that's not replete with potential that God wants to use, that God wants to work in. And there's no leader, there's no pastor who has has enough of the gifts. So that means that there's no pastor that God isn't capable of using, because none of us have all the gifts. And so begin to just pray with that and ask the Lord to stir up your heart, to place within you the vision that He wants for your local parish, and share what's on your heart with some key people and bring them around you and ask for their help, because you can't do it by yourself. And finally, just be patient. It happens slowly, but it can happen.
Amen. Amen. I just think about every church you talked about today. They had their own unique challenges and problems. And even the one Plum church you talked about had its own unique problems and issues. And so problems and issues aren't your enemy. They're your opportunity to grow into a great leader. And so, Father James, thank you for being on the show. Love your friendship. Appreciate your ministry. Really excited. Been praying for your conference in the UK. Hope that goes really well. And we'll have you back on again maybe sometime. We'll talk about or beyond the parish specifically. That'd be a fun conversation too.
Hey, thanks, Ron, and thanks everyone for listening in. God bless.
I want to encourage you, as you lead this week, be faithful to God and generous to others. See you next time, and remember, if you're still breathing, you are powered for impact.